Okay, if I can ask Robin to take the screen down, and I think that we will get started. Excellent. So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this Impetus event on what next for fair access and participation. We are broadcasting live from our offices in Charing Cross in London. It's a little grey and overcast outside, but it's bright, warm and enthusiastic in our virtual world. I can see that we already have 170 people joining us and more coming online. It is great to see so many talented people from schools, universities, government and the third sector at our event today. As you all know, 2021 was a big year for higher education, and clearly things are definitely not getting any quieter this year. We are looking forward to exploring how we can work together across the higher education sector, how the third sector can engage with universities and government to support the fair access agenda, and how we can ensure young people from underrepresented backgrounds are always at the heart of the progress we seek. We are delighted to be joined by the new Director for Fair Access and Participation at the Office for Students, John Blake, in his first external speaking event, and a fantastic panel who I'll introduce later. Firstly, some housekeeping. All attendees have their mics and videos turned off, so you should just be able to see the speakers. If you are having any technical issues, please do put a message in the chat and one of my colleagues will try to help. We encourage you to use the chat function to share your thoughts and get the discussion going. This event is as much about hearing from you as it is for us, as it is for you to hear from us. The Q&A function will be open throughout the event. Please do get your questions for John and the panel in there. And if your question is for a specific person, please do include that. Now, before I hand over to John, for anyone who isn't familiar with Impetus and the work we do, I hope you'll indulge me for less than 1 minute with my Chief Executive hat on. At Impetus, we believe that all young people, no matter their background, can succeed in school, at work, and in life if they have the right support. We are often referred to as the impact people because of our focus on high quality, robust data and our relentlessness on taking an evidence-based approach to our grant making, convening, and policy recommendations. We work with sector-leading charities across the education and youth employment sectors, like InterUniversity and the Access Project, to help them deliver more and better education outcomes for underrepresented young people year on year. We take the lessons learned from this work to policy and decision makers so that all young people can get the support they need to thrive. We're passionate about collaboration. That's why we convene the Fair Access Coalition, which brings together the voice of the third sector in the fair access debate. And it's why we're so pleased to have brought together your voices in this event today. Now, without further ado, I would love to introduce John Blake as he answers the question, what next for fair access and participation? John.
Thank you, Eleanor, and good afternoon, everyone. As you've heard, my name is John Blake, and I am the new Director for Fair Access and Participation at the Office for Students. I'm hugely grateful to all of you for tuning in for this, and especially to Impetus for giving me an opportunity to speak on such a vital topic. I'm particularly grateful to Helena and the team for all the behind-the-scenes work that goes into making these events happen. Impetus makes an incredible contribution to the cause of social mobility by supporting a wide variety of charities dedicated to improving the lives of young people who have experienced poverty. It is great to know that so many of those they support have been able to join us today, especially members of the Fair Access Coalition. Between them, members of the Fair Access Coalition partner with almost every major HE provider in the country, as well as 2,000 schools, working with over 70,000 students and young people every year. That is a phenomenal achievement, and one I hope our work in the OFS can support further. Like many people joining us, I've spent my entire career in education. I've seen all its different phases and worked alongside staff from a range of institutions. I've been a student union officer, a classroom assistant and youth worker, a teacher, and a teacher trainer. I've worked with outstanding colleagues on early years development and primary school curriculum, developing award-winning extracurricular creative arts provision, and doing the hard slog of intense intervention with young people preparing for exams. I know that across that whole spectrum, from key workers in nurseries encouraging early speech and language, all the way across students' learning journeys, to the university lecturer leading a seminar on philology and semantics, that we are all united by an absolute belief that every part of our education system should create and foster equality of opportunity and offer and enhance real and enduring social mobility. Yet for all that, we know it does not happen as often as we want, is not as sustained as it should be, is not as successful as we need it to be. Just 27% of students who are on free school meals eligible go on to university, compared to 46% of their better off peers. And that gap, once tentatively closing, is now growing again. It is not hard to offer reasons that this should be so. Our society is profoundly unequal, and the predations of the COVID pandemic have only made that worse. We know that disadvantaged pupils lost on average 2 months learning from the first lockdown, more than their more affluent peers. And that was on top of the gap before the pandemic, when disadvantaged pupils were already over 18 months behind their peers in attainment by age 16. But true as that is, I am often struck by the speed with which some involved in education will reach for those statistics to say that we in schools, colleges, and universities have already done all we can. It seems some people wish us to accept that demography is destiny, and that if the money we spend on education doesn't change that, then, well, what did you expect? But that surely cannot be right. Education is nothing if it is not an intervention. It changes people, creates new ideas, new opportunities, new expectations. It is precisely because it changes us that we value it. That is its incredible power. And as it changes individuals, so their collective experience of change can transform families, communities, and society. So we should not dwell on what can't be done, but focus on what can. In the school system over the past 20 years, we have seen what dedicated, innovative action can achieve. What began in London with a turnaround from the worst education in the entire country to outperforming every other region in outcomes, inspection results, and improvements for disadvantaged pupils is making its way across the country. With stronger, richer curriculums, more focused and instructive pedagogy, more accurate, more timely, and more responsive assessment. Crucially, a huge part of those changes was the insistence that our charitable sector could and should do more to support the state's education responsibilities. This isn't a new idea. The English school system was essentially created by voluntary associations, friendly societies, and campaigning groups. The fresh perspectives and different ways of working that exist in the third sector have always been a valuable tool of challenge and change to government's approach to health, education, and welfare. I am proud to have worked for two charities, ARC and the Harris Federation, running families of schools providing enduring and powerful networks between practitioners in different phases of education. In the audience here, we have representatives of other charities who also make that difference. Programs like Inter-University and the Access Project have repeatedly demonstrated how much difference they make to the students who work with them, in terms of academic outcomes and progression into higher education, tackling poor attainment and the poor life chances it leads to. What those charities have in common is not just a strong sense of mission and dedicated staff, but a clear sense of how networks engaging with young people across their lives can combine their impact to be far more powerful than any one actor alone. That is a crucial lesson. If we face long odds in making a difference to children's life chances, just demanding that people work longer and harder isn't going to fix that. We are not short on people who will give up days, weeks, years of their life to pour into projects supporting the vulnerable and disadvantaged. We are not short on good suggestions, possible solutions, and rough ideas how things could be better. No, what we lack still is enough commitment from all those dedicated people to work together, leveraging their contributions one to another to create a massively more powerful impact. And what we lack is enough of the right evidence about how to best implement our plans in ways which work consistently, straightforwardly, and effectively in the real world. And we have to change both of those things if we are going to make all our work worthwhile and make the difference to equality of opportunity and real social mobility we all want. That is why I was so keen to speak with all of you here today, because we have so many people here who are already building those networks, already following that evidence. And we have more people here who can, should, and want to do more of that. And I believe a big part of my role at the Office for Students is helping create the best environment for that collaboration to begin, grow, and continue. Of course, the OFS already does a huge amount to support this work. Since the OFS was established, over 250 access and participation plans have been agreed, committing more than £2.5 billion over 5 years to supporting learners from underrepresented groups, including many examples of partnership work with third sector organisations. We have helped establish TASO, Transforming Access and Student Outcomes in Higher Education, a What Works Centre to identify the best available evidence and promote the most effective interventions. The next stage of access and participation reform is to embed that networking and evaluation at the heart of our regulation and HE providers' commitments. To achieve that, I have 3 key aspirations for my time as Director for Fair Access and Participation. The first is unapologetically nerdy. Evaluate, evaluate, evaluate. Everyone I have spoken to about this agrees that for 20 years or more of widening participation work, we have nowhere near 20 years worth of evidence about what works. We can't share what works, and we can't make it work better if we don't actually know what does work. In schools over the past 10 years, the Education Endowment Foundation has transformed the use of evidence and the work schools do to add to the sum of knowledge about effective educational practice. TASO is making some strong progress, but for evidence and evaluation to become the cornerstone of access and participation, we need to do more. That means accepting that some interventions will fail, but so long as we are learning from those failures, then some good has still arisen, we are keen to explore the sandbox of regulation to give providers committed to generating robust evidence the space to do so. But we expect the projects committed to in access and participation plans to be evaluated, for those evaluations to be independent, and for them to be published, just as the impact reports for many of the charities here today are. My second aspiration is that our access and participation work will align with and be seen as a crucial part of the OFS's quality and standards work. It is not enough that learners from underrepresented groups can get into college and university. Access is about successful higher education, not just any higher education. Real and enduring social mobility via higher education requires qualifications which are valued by students, employers, and society. I absolutely reject any suggestion that there is a trade-off between access and quality. If providers believe the regulation of quality justifies reducing their openness to those from families and communities with less experience of higher education, or who have traveled less common, often more demanding routes to reach them, they should be ashamed of themselves. They should also be under no illusion that every power the OFS has, including removing providers' access to higher fees, will be deployed to ensure that all providers abide by their responsibility to improve access, participation, and quality. Providers who are keen to understand how they can do that should be seeking out both their peers within the sector and those external projects and programs demonstrating success in this area. My third aspiration is to see more and more powerful school-university partnership activity. I really don't need to tell this audience that the attainment gap opens early in life, so attempts to close it have to start then too. Some have asked why this is the business of universities. Aren't nurseries and schools, families and communities, local and national government supposed to sort this out? I could respond by saying that such attainment raising is in the direct interest of HE providers. More young people achieving more strongly means more potential students eligible to attend college and university, and a greater chance of them succeeding. And no doubt that is true. But I think to say only that betrays a very impoverished view of the role and importance of higher education. HE is offered by cornerstone civic institutions. And while some providers have more international horizons than others, all of them have a locality, one that more often than not, they share their name with. Universities and colleges have a moral duty to put their shoulder to the wheel of improving that wider community they sit within. And as both educational and civic organizations, improving attainment in our schools is an essential part of that work. But they should not assume that this duty falls to them alone. Of course it doesn't. We are asking providers to seek out strategic, enduring, mutually beneficial partnerships with schools and with the third sector, all working together to contribute to this work. In April, the OFS will be hosting an event bringing together universities, schools, and the third sector to investigate current best practice and explore ways forward. No one is expecting universities to save schools. The school leaders and teachers here in the audience would, I am sure, give very short shrift to the idea that saving is needed or wanted. But precisely because the challenges ahead of us are so substantial, it is essential HE providers also pull their weight on pre-16 attainment, a challenge which affects us all. But if I haven't been clear enough about this already, providers should not set out to do this work alone. I was a school teacher for long enough to work through 3 national curriculums and 3 GCSE specification rewrites. It wasn't wrong for government and regulators to do the work of improving the curriculum and assessment. But far, far too often, schools responded by working in a silo to implement those changes. I urge, frankly, I beg universities and colleges to not follow that model. Please do not separately all go and try and reinvent the same wheel in splendid isolation. There are provenly successful programs and projects already around for you to partner with, to help expand, to challenge with new ideas. There are strong school trusts and mission groups in the school sector for you to engage with, learn from, and support. It is by building on what we already know works, which will help us create more and better evidenced interventions to achieve the real and enduring social mobility we all want. This is not to say that we do not want to see innovation and experimentation, provided there is commitment to independent published evaluation. But we are far more likely to accept as viable innovative projects where they are founded on strong bonds of collaboration and partnership between HE, schools, and charities. In the coming months, we will be asking HE providers to update their current access and participation plans to better reflect both work they're already doing and new efforts in the areas of strategic school engagement, quality, non-traditional pathways to HE, and evaluation. We will then begin the process of agreeing access and participation plans for the next 4-year cycle. As we do so, we hope, we expect, many providers will reach out to their partners in the charitable sector and to school groups. The Office for Students' own UniConnect partnerships will be crucial bridges for all of this. And I strongly encourage everyone here, whether in universities, schools, or charities, to take this as an opportunity to strengthen already existing partnerships and programs and to build new and exciting networks for action. We should also ensure student perspectives are a key part of our work. I've been encouraged in my first few weeks in this role to see the work that OFS is doing to engage with students. I attended the student panel last month to hear their challenge and feedback on our access and participation priorities. It will be important going forward to engage with students, including in higher education and schools, as it is for providers in their own access and participation work. I am enormously excited by the potential for this agenda and by the huge amounts of positive feedback I have already received from universities and colleges keen to get going on this work. Together, we can ensure that young people can achieve at school, succeed in higher education, and thrive in their chosen lives and careers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. That great speech, and I can see lots of questions coming through on the Q&A chat. We won't be able to do all questions, but I know my colleagues will try and answer some of them directly where possible. It's got 10 minutes for John to answer as many questions as he is able, and I will paraphrase where people have asked similar things. Maybe just to kick us off, John, kind of as we kind of collate the questions. At Impetus, we work with charities that cover the life cycle of a young person's journey through education, higher education, and into employment. And so how would you want to see schools, colleges, and universities utilise the third sector, a sector that's often already working across these spaces? You know, how do you bridge these gaps, and how can the third sector help the OFS implement your agenda?
So I think it's not the OFS that needs to be helped. I mean, we might need lots of help and feedback and things like that. I'm very happy to receive it. But fundamentally, this is a challenge for providers in HE and for the partnerships and networks they build with schools, colleges, and the third sector. And I really want to be quite open and broad-minded in what that might look like. You know, I was a teacher through the period of, you know, Ofsted wants, and, you know, the moment something was put in an Ofsted inspection report, it ran around the system 4 times, becoming a sort of dangerous mutation in the process and really causing damage. So I don't think it's the job of the OFS to say, you X provider must do Y thing with Z people. It is to challenge providers to find the best evidence and consider their capacity, their resources, their expertise, and work out how to bring those things together to generate the change that we expect to see. We already have set in the current APPs a very clear sense of the sort of ambition level that we're looking for in the work that's already there. And some providers do have a fair amount of school engagement work there. But one of the reasons that we've chosen to go through, those who tuned in on Tuesday to my speech to the sector will know that we're planning to pursue a 3-stage process to bring this in. So our first stage will be monitoring. Our second stage will be asking providers to bring forward variations to add what they're already doing into their APPs and to think about building new networks. In that process, we're expecting providers to reach out to the third sector and to schools and discuss what they need to do and begin to build those networks. But it's got to be an equal partnership. And I think colleagues in the third sector already have a huge amount of experience and knowledge about what best works, how to do it. So I think the message is you know, go find these people and help colleagues in universities understand the difference they can make, and also receive the benefit of input from those providers into your own work.
Thank you, John. So I'm going to take a question a few people have asked. Ashley asked it first on the chat, but how do we ensure that all young people get support, even if they don't have a higher education institution nearby?
Yeah, so I think one of the things I want to be really clear about is that this isn't providers just to work in their local backyard. I think there is an important place-based function here, and I think that fits very well with some of what we're hearing of the levelling up agenda in the levelling up white paper and what we might be expecting in the schools white paper. But I think it clearly can't be the case that it's just those areas. And many of the activities that are already going aren't ones that only need to be done locally. And again, I think it's about thinking about what expertise and knowledge that people might have. And I think partnering with the third sector is a really powerful way of extending reach beyond an institution's locality, because many of the providers are more widely based, have regional offshoots, or are nationally based. So it is absolutely about ensuring that all disadvantaged students are assisted in total, but that will be different in different places, and it will be different for different students. But and to be clear, it's also not about only identifying those students who are on the track to university or might be brought on that track to university. I think much of this work will be institution agnostic. It should be route agnostic. We may well be advising people to take degree apprenticeships or other qualifications in HE or that lead to HE. And it might be that the best advice for some young people is not to go to university at 18. That doesn't mean it won't be right for them at some point. But I'm very conscious that we provide one shot in this country for young people, all learners, to have a state subsidized undergraduate education. And we need to make sure that that is taken up by all the people who want it and need it, but that it's the right education offered at the right time, and in the right place. I'm being barracked now in the comments by fellow panelists. So yes, I think system change is a bigger piece, Ray. I'm sure we will come back to that in due course.
It's always good to have some heckling, John.
It's great. I mean, I literally I'm in a room on my own being heckled. This is quite spectacular.
Very good. So I got a question from Timothy, which says, great to see the focus on early intervention, giving the existing evidence showing how important it is for both attainment and aspirations. So how do you expect the Office for Students to encourage and recognise this earlier intervention work? and and measure meaningfully, as in recent years, he feels the regulatory focus seems to have been very much on the older age ranges who have less distance to travel before progressing to HE.
Yeah, and I think this is part again of that desire to be generous in looking at the projects and responsive to the kind of evidence and evaluation we can produce. We will have to think very hard about metrics and how we know whether something is working or making the difference. But again, that's part of the conversation when people say, well, we want to do this in our APP. Part of the conversation will be, well, how will we know if it's worked? Let's identify it. That's why we want to bring TASO in. I don't think the question of whether it's good quality evidence or not is one that I should be making. It's one that TASO as an independent body should be making for the whole sector. And that point about the sandbox, where we see people saying, look, we want to do this thing. We think there's a strong evidence base for believing this will work, but this is likely to be innovative and new. It will be targeting students who may not make it to university ever, and certainly not for 5 or 10 years. We will think very carefully about, well, how will we measure if that's working, and what impact that will have on the other targets that we set for providers. This is a sort of open call really to providers and those they work with to think about, what are the best changes we've made. But I mean, to be clear, it won't just be, and we don't want, well, we're all going to pour it all into early years, because we need intervention at all the different stages. Because, although I do support stronger intervention in the early years, we know that if we sorted the early years, that would still leave us about 18 years worth of young people who needed support in the interim. And I don't think we're going to sort early years overnight either.
Thank you. Well, I want to switch now from early years. We've had quite a number of questions in the chat about the plans for mature students.
Yep.
Obviously, and it's been focused on young people, people going straight from school to HE. So what are the plans for the OFS around mature students?
So I think I will be entirely honest and say I think mature students is an area I personally think more about, and that we need to consider carefully. I think we know that experience is different. I think we know that the challenges and the expectations are likely different. So I think what this agenda looks like for mature students coming in is, again, something I want to have a really open and honest conversation about. Where I do think it's really important to stress is that many of our providers who work mainly or to a large extent with mature students will have a huge amount of experience and knowledge about the sort of things that would have supported those learners if they'd wanted to join universities much younger. I mean, I know some mature students are coming to the university sector for the first time entirely of their own volition, but we know that a lot of them are also there because things didn't work out for the first time in schooling or in the advice they were given originally. And many providers are very effective in dealing with that. And we need to capture that knowledge and make sure that is spread across the system. So I think there is a really big role here for providers who have quite different intakes from the median institution to think about what that knowledge is and how they can best share it. And again, I want to be quite generous in thinking about how we do that and how we measure that work.
Thank you, John. So final question, and then we'll let you relax, which is just, how do you feel thinking about your plans and your interest in that balance between tried and tested and new and risky interventions? And what do you think?
I've just seen, I think in the comments, someone said that they're uncomfortable with the word sandbox because these are real people we're talking about, and that's true. And I get that. I like lots of people here, spent my entire career working with young people, and I think we should all be acutely aware of the extraordinary impact we can have, for good or ill, on them. I think when I talk about the need for risk and innovation and the need for sandboxes, it's a language that can, I certainly don't want it to sound dehumanizing. That's not my point at all. But I think there are so many people of such good intent in this sector that I think sometimes we think that having good intent is enough. And it may not be. There may be things we're doing that we genuinely believe work, but actually when we evaluate them, we'll find that we're not. And it's really important. We are spending huge amounts of money, effort, and time on this. We need to know what works, and we need to be open to really having that proper evaluation system, to taking risks, not dangerous risks with people's lives, but making considered, thoughtful bets on what we think should work, could work, and develop that evidence base. And I think people will ask, should we, we're spending money on evaluation, we should be spending on students. So, because it really matters, because in the long run, we've got to narrow down to the stuff that really makes the difference and the most effective spending of that money. Because otherwise, and I think, I really don't want to criticize people who work in widening participation. It's incredibly important work, and people should feel valued in doing it. But if there is stuff that we're doing that isn't really making the difference, I know that's going to be hard, and there may be things that I find out that I think should work and they don't. But we've got to face that truth, not hope it's not there. And then we've got to go on, we've got to have that honesty to build on what we know works and is the best and most effective way of doing things, not just cling to things because, we've always done it that way.
Thank you, John. So huge appreciation for your comments today and asking those questions. You'll be pleased to know there's like another 22 questions in the chat, which we couldn't get to all of them. Just maybe kind of in making a few kind of like summary comments before we pass on to the panel. I think that we have really heard from John today, what we all know, this kind of enduring attainment gap for underrepresented students, and that the pandemic has only reinforced that. I think it was really nice to hear John talk about the transformational power of education. We all work in education because we know this, but sometimes you can forget that in your day-to-day. Kind of the absolute value of evidence-based interventions in solving for better fair access and better fair kind of participation, and the opportunities that are coming with these government plans to work together and to collaborate to solve in really effective ways. So I just want to say kind of that huge thanks. I was pleased to hear about access and quality, sort of mirrors something at Impetus when we say attainment and nurture. It's not an either or dichotomy. And I know for those of you who are asking about mature students, I think we heard John say there's still more to think about. So I think there is an opportunity here to be sharing those evidence-based solutions, looking for like-minded partners and making sure that we're in a better situation in the next 3 years. I'm now going to introduce our fantastic panel today. So we have Ray Tooth, the Chief Executive of Villiers Park and co-chair of the Fair Access Coalition. We have Gino Graziano, who is the Director of Widening Participation and Social Mobility at the University of Southampton. We've got Erin Attridge, the Programme Manager for the Elephant Group. And we've got Harlan Wynne, who is a past student of Impetus Charity Partner into University and who now sits on their advisory panel, giving advice and guidance to the charity. Now, each panelist has 3 minutes to respond to John's speech and set out their opening remarks. I've told them that I will guillotine them at 3 minutes. I'm not awful, but I like to keep to time. So I'm now going to hand over to Ray to kick us off. Ray.
Thanks, Eleanor. Gosh, 3 minutes is a tiny window, so I'm going to crack on. John, thank you. That was really interesting to listen to, and you've clearly put a lot of thought into how you can bring your vast experience of the whole education journey to bear on how we make sure that really effective collaboration happens at all points of somebody's life cycle to ensure those final outcomes, the outcomes of what adulthood looks like for people who grew up with disadvantage, and making sure that everybody gets a fair chance. I had thought of lots of things that I wanted to say, but I particularly wanted to reflect on some of those discussion points around evaluation. And it struck me thinking about it that the elephant in the room is that when we're talking about interventions that we want to evaluate, what we're looking for is a low-cost intervention. That means that there is no difference in outcome, even though there's a difference in resources. And I think that collectively, we just need to sense check some of that. Now, that's not to say I don't have huge ambitions for the young people that we work with at Villiers Park and my charity partners and universities and schools have for those young people. But the reality that we're working with is that over a lifetime, hundreds of thousands of pounds will be spent on advantaged kids that are not spent on their less affluent peers. So not only do they have less resources, and I mean, they're going to school hungry, that they have less time because they're doing part-time jobs where they can get them to help support their family. They're responsible for childcare, but they have additional loads. And we know that there is an overlap with social disadvantage and poverty and some of those other characteristics that make you more likely to face discrimination. So when we're talking about our interventions in terms of academic interventions, we're doing this in the context of young people who are living their lives either genuinely fearful that their existence is an affront to some people because they face daily racism or homophobia or ableism, or they're able to mask it, they're able to hide. I'm one of those brilliant people who can look totally like a normal person who came from a privileged background, but that takes an awful lot of work. And when we're doing that work, it detracts from our capacity to do learning. So unless we are really honest about the enormity of the gap and the opportunities that we have to plug that gap without significant system change, I think that we're probably going to set ourselves up for a bit of a failure. So what are the solutions? Well, of course, we need to evaluate. Of course, we need to understand how we make the biggest difference. But if we're serious about collaboration, collaboration means being able to have some difficult conversations. That means being able to be really clear about where there is system failure that requires change, not just from organisations, but also from government. It means that we need to understand what is achievable with the size of the envelope that we're given. And it means that we have to be realistic about the impact that we're going to have based on that small piece of focused work that we're able to deliver. And to do that, we need a good theory of change. So I just wanted to bring in why the third sector is so important here, because we are the organisations that can say to government, fund schools properly, fund universities properly. You need to join up this department from this department, because we're able to do that. We are the independent people looking at whole systems. So not only can we do delivery, not only do we work on the ground with the young people that you're looking to make changes for, but we get to see the whole system and we can reflect that back to you and sometimes say some really hard truths. You know what, if there's £100,000 difference a year in what I'm investing in my kids and what somebody down the road isn't able to invest in their kids, you have to change the system as well as doing your outreach work.
Thank you very much. What a great note to finish on. And I'm going to hand over to Gina.
Well, you want me to follow that, do you? That was fire, Ray. So, okay, where do I start? So, first of all, I'm on my stopwatch and I will try and get everything done in 3 minutes. So, what I wanted to start with really is that obviously I work for the University of Southampton, but really I consider that I belong to widening participation over and above that. And I know that a lot of my colleagues across the sector, that's whether they work for universities or for third sector or for schools, feel the same. Collaboration is in our DNA. So I'm really heartened by this kind of tone that we have in this session today. We are one community, and obviously our overarching goal is to make things better and make the future fairer. Now, I don't want to at all diminish what Ray's just said, because I 100% agree with it. But I guess what I'd add to it is that trust is a really, really important element within this equation of how we're going to work together and how we work with our students. It's one of the most valuable currencies that we can have. So we need to make sure that between organisations, first and foremost, that line between competition and collaboration isn't stretched so taut that it snaps. And whilst the outcomes-based targets that I saw people chatting about in the chat earlier on have undoubtedly driven a lot of change in WP, I would say that we need more nuanced and intelligent targets around, particularly around collaboration, for us to drive this forward and embed it into our policy and institutions. transparency and accountability is absolutely important, fundamental to trust. We need to cultivate a culture of openness and support within our sector for each other and for the students. And I'm super pleased to see the focus on evaluation. I am also a bit of an evaluation nerd, and it's a really good example of where we've worked with Ray and Julian and colleagues at Villiers Park as a third sector organisation to work on that theory of change cultural development piece at Southampton too. Sharing evidence across our sector is also obviously a good way to embed that. Context is really important in that sense, but we can build on each other's successes and learn from each other's pitfalls. Listening is obviously another core component of trust, and that's something we need to build in and facilitate between all the different parts of our sector. And I think that when we consider the bank of expertise between ourselves in universities, colleagues in schools and colleagues in the third sectors, when we bring our different bits of the jigsaw to the table, we can put that together for a bigger picture. I am going to cut across just to say the most important aspect of trust, though, the most important dimension is obviously the relationship with students. And they have a right to expect that we're going to support them. They're going to get a quality experience with us. I absolutely agree with that. There is a dimension around terminology and some of the language we use. The sandbox was a good example, and John's point about the transparency of plans. You know, we have a propensity to talk to ourselves, to be honest, in this sector rather than the people it's for. And that is, in my view, detrimental to trust. We're not going to achieve it with missionary approaches, deficit thinking, buzzwords, or putting students into daft metrics or categories or labels. It's not going to work, and it's going to be offensive and disrespectful. I think that's my 3 minutes, and I've gone over. I'm sorry, Eleanor, but that's where I'm going to finish. We all need to keep our eye on the prize, which is a fairer for future for everybody.
Thank you very much, Gino. Really appreciated. I'm now going to hand over to Erin from the Elephant Group. Erin.
Thanks, Eleanor. Yeah, there are so many interesting points that have been raised and so many things I could respond to, but I definitely go over the time. So what I want to focus on is this emphasis on collaboration with schools in particular, which is a focus we are particularly excited about. We know that traditionally conversations about access and participation tend to happen between government bodies and universities. So at the Elephant Group, we are first and foremost a charity that seek to address the underrepresentation of students from non-selective state schools at top universities. But in our design, the structure of the program of the charity was basically done to enable schools to be part of those conversations. So as a charity, we enable schools and university leaders to essentially converse, exchange ideas, share best practice, and that learning takes place in all directions, including inter-school sharing of best practice and inter-university sharing of best practice. Alongside that, we upskill teachers whilst we support our young people to ensure that the knowledge we share stays in schools and is embedded as part of that school kind of culture. And the way in which we do this alongside our kind of sustained program, so we work with students from year 12 to year 13, is we have a regional structure. In every region, we have what we call a program team. So that is a team of teachers who work on the ground with students, such as head of sixth forms, UCAS leads. We meet every half term, we discuss what's going on at schools in those regions, what trends are occurring, and collaboratively we propose solutions. What we then do is we pass on those solutions to Project Board, another kind of body, which is made up of school leaders as well as university access and WP staff, who frankly, I guess, have the access to resource to enable these solutions to be put in place. That has led to some really successful, I guess, programs and initiatives, including tutoring from Uplearn when we realized that there was a key issue with students studying STEM subjects, or mentoring for boys in particular in areas such as the East Midlands, where we were able to kind of hear from teachers what was going on the ground and what was particularly needed. So these two bodies remain in conversation with each other to ensure that we are constantly responding and reacting to the needs of schools and the regional areas that we work with. In the time I have, I'm not necessarily going to suggest that we nationalise this programme, although it'd be great for us at the Elephant Group. But what I do want to highlight is that collaboration is an ongoing dialogue. And it's one where, yes, everybody needs to pull their weight, but I think the voice of schools really needs to be prioritised and considered. One thing that John said earlier is no one is expecting universities to save schools. That's not what we expect. That's not how we work. But what we do expect is that schools are listened to and schools are trusted because they do know their students, they work with them on a regular basis. And we're really proud that that's something that is part of our structure, and we hope that can be expanded under these new plans.
Thank you, Erin, really appreciated. And last but definitely not least is Harlem from InterUniversity. So Harlem.
Hello. There's been so much spoken about this afternoon already, and I don't know how much more I can add. But I am someone who has benefited from a charity like InterUniversity. I started working with them when I was 8 years old. I'm now 22. I studied at Durham, studied history and English, and now I'm at Cambridge doing my teacher training in the early years. And I am seeing myself in the children I am teaching. I am seeing the kind of struggle that they had, and actually the fact that the system has not changed and that the issues that I faced is still the same, which is really sad. But I have benefited from intervention, and now a charity like InterUniversity, when I started, only had 2 centres, and now they have many, many more and have grown so much with support from other people and more children kind of going and being aware of it, and schools being aware and universities participating. I think one thing that's really important is that collaboration, but also recognizing that the students themselves need to see themselves at these institutions. That's something I took away. I got to go to universities through InterUniversity and experience going and studying and what it would be like. So when I actually went to apply, I felt like it was a place for me. I felt like it was something that was achievable and attainable for someone like myself, who was the first in my family to go to university. Whereas I went to a university where parents and grandparents had gone, and people would bring their gowns that their dad had worn from years ago and things like that. So I think the most important thing, if I can add anything to this conversation, is that please remember that the students we're talking about may not have any concept of what university is like, and that they can achieve that they can go and be there and be valuable and have a voice in that place. And they definitely do, and our society needs that, but we need to make sure that they feel empowered and that they feel like they are able to go there and make a difference. And that's our job as people talking about it, to then discuss amongst ourselves how we can help those students feel like that. So it's not a competition between universities. Every university has a place for somebody, and it's the right place for that person. It's just about us helping them to get there.
Very succinct and prompt, but excellent comments, kind of Harlem, and kind of that envisaging is so important. So I am going to jump into the questions now, and please be kind to me. There's a lot of questions. I'll do my best. So Ray, I'm going to ask you Sarah's question first, and maybe I'll get Erin to also respond to this. So she has said, kind of for the panel, is part of the issue being too data driven by different proxy measures within widening participation that don't correlate to colleges and schools? And thus, should we be finding more unified ways to identify and support learners as individuals who could benefit from school-university charity partnerships? So how could we improve our ways of working with different groups of learners across different targets in each sector? Meaty question. Take
Great
part of
question,
it.
right?
And then
I'm like, well, Sarah, that is an absolutely fantastic question. And people who know me, who see me around, will know that while I absolutely see the value of big data and using Matrix to help us to kind of scan where it is that we need to be, I really don't think that we get impactful interventions or really good quality understanding of the impact that we have unless we are adding to that with qualitative evaluation. I'm also really conscious that some of the groups that we work with, we're talking about pretty small numbers because of the unique circumstances that they are living in. And so you never get big enough data sets to be able to aggregate and have meaningful learning. And so I think the key to effective evaluation is understanding what is it that you can actually learn from the evaluation you're doing, what is proportionate, and being aware that the circumstances we're working in are always changing. And so we need to be responsive to that. Now, how you achieve that is another question. And for me, I think it always has to be about building really strong relationships between academics, between practitioners and between policymakers, because unless you are looking at something through those three lenses, it's really hard to come up with a robust understanding of what's impactful and what isn't, and why and how you can replicate it, and understand how you replicate it in the real world, and understand how you put in place system changes and funding to make sure that you can grow it where it's going to make a difference. So I tried to keep that pretty succinct, Eleanor. I hope that's okay.
I'll give you marks later, Ray. No, definitely succinct. I'm going to go to Erin to answer the same question, and then I'm going to jump to something else. So Erin.
I think Ray was spot on with her answer, particularly about replication growth and what you do moving forward. I want to address the part of the question that looks particularly at kind of which metrics we're using, what language is being used. And I do think that there could be a lot more done within the sector to ensure that we are using a shared language. Of course, when we talk to different stakeholders, we use different language. That is, how charities and all organizations work. But the more we try to put schools and universities into the same room, the more we realize, at times they are speaking completely different languages. And schools are being expected to know and understand which of their students are eligible for which programs. And actually, schools do not necessarily have the data tools to know whether a student is from a particular polar quintile or from an IMD quintile. That's not necessarily the language they use. I think much more can be done to kind of get universities thinking a bit more about the language used by schools, such as pupil premium. In addition to that, I think if universities want to work more with schools and kind of get in the door, I think they need to be very explicit about how what they do meets the needs of schools. So using things like the Gatsby benchmarks, referring to ways in which schools are kind of being assessed and measured, would be, just a fantastic way to kind of get in and begin speaking the same language. I hope kind of throughout the point I'm making is, yes, we need to be on the same page, but I think a bit more effort could be made by universities to get on the same page as schools rather than expecting schools to change.
Thank you, Erin. And I definitely think it's coming across about the absolute value of shared data points. And maybe if we were all better at grounding our language in the needs of our client group, which is young people, we wouldn't get so stuck in our jargon. I'm going to go to Gino now, and we got asked a question on UniConnect. So the UniConnect program has been positive and is impartial. Would we ever move to a model where higher education institutions do not have widening participation teams, and instead these teams are part of UniConnect style models? And I've also had another UniConnect question, which is, what is the unique thing universities can offer and how can they work with UniConnect? So pick your best bits, Gino, and over to you.
Okay, so sorry, I'm just that's okay, mate. So sorry. No worries. I'm on an away day. I've nipped out to do the conference, by the way. I'm not in a castle, by the way. I've just noticed that. So I'm going to answer what am I going to answer to that? So I think one day, I hope one day there is no need for widening participation. I hope one day there is no need for my job, right? I do not want to be doing this job for the rest of my life. And I hope that we will reach a point where what we do collectively as a kind of community here is so normal and so like embedded into how kind of like society is and how institutions work, that there just isn't that need for it. I can envisage a national kind of grid, if you like, a national tube map where students are able to where pupils and students are easily able to find their way to get to where they need to go with the infrastructure around them to support them. Do that with specialist universities with their in all their glory and all their own independent richness, as kind of maps on the tube, and an organisation such as UniConnect helping them get to where they need to go. I can envisage that. I don't know, obviously, like from a policy sort of angle, if that's ever sort of on the cards, but I do think there's a fundamental thing, going back to John's point about making sure what the policy we're churning out is accessible and easily to understand, and actually like the language point as well, that I worry that we get ever more complex and ever more complicated, and obviously we need to be thinking through the lens of the students we're working with, and what is going to be the most facile way for them to get to where they need to go. So yeah, I probably didn't answer either of those questions, but that's kind of roughly sort of like what my kind of views are on that.
Thank you, Gino. Really appreciated. I'm just going to ask Jennifer's question now to Harlem. So what was the main thing that InterUniversity did, kind of, which helped you realise that university was the right thing for you? And similarly, kind of, you know, once you got to Durham, what was it that they did that made you feel like you belonged?
So InterUniversity definitely built up a relationship with me. The staff knew what I liked. They knew I liked to read. They knew I liked to write. They knew what my interests were. And then they signpost me to individuals, mentors, and to projects and activities that I would enjoy that would then kind of foster that love and open my eyes to what the possibilities were at university for myself. And I've had those relationships with staff for a long period of time. I mean, 8 years old to now, I'm 22. So, I mean, and I still am in contact with InterUniversity. So I think that speaks volumes. I'm on their advisory panel, and I feel valued, and I feel like my voice and my education was important to them as much as it was to myself. Durham is a slightly more complex issue because essentially Durham is not an institution that was set up for somebody like myself, and that was very difficult in the beginning to deal with and accept, because I was kind of going in naively. I thought, well, everyone goes to university, I'm going to, and this is going to be great fun, and actually it's not, and they're not necessarily very well equipped to deal with those that have different backgrounds and have not been exposed to university and what that life is like by their parents or by their siblings. So that was a harder challenge. They did have support in place, but you do have to be a bit more forthright and seek that out for yourself and lean on the support that I had already built. So the support of the InterUniversity helping me through that transition, that's more what I leaned on rather than Durham itself. I kind of made myself comfortable. I made myself a place there, which is what you have to do. You kind of have to knock the doors down and say, well, I'm here now and I'm going to be here, and you're going to have to adjust to me, which I don't know how good that is, but that was my experience anyway.
I think it's really honest, Harlem. I certainly know when I went to university, I felt incredibly overwhelmed, and took me time to assert myself and realize that it needed to be university on my terms, not university on their terms. So I think we've got time for like one more question. So we have been asked, kind of knowing what we do about level 2 pass rates for young people kind of from underrepresented groups, how can we best support level 2 transition to ensure kind of young people can really stay on the path towards higher education? So we all know on this call, you know, level 2 attainment is the most critical factor in helping people from underrepresented groups transition to higher education. So it's an open question to the panel, but what can we do? Obviously, investment is critical to make sure they stay on that path and can fully thrive in the ways they want to.
Gosh, that's quite a question. Eradicate poverty, fix structural inequality, and then work closely with young people, regardless of background, to help them identify what is their purpose, what are their values, understand their skills and attributes, and then support them to build the life that they want, not the life that we think they should have. And that obviously is absolutely the core thread to all of the work that we do at Villiers Park. And we do that work over a 4-year period with young people, including work over transitions into level 2, into level 3, and into university, and then offer some additional support at the end when people are looking for work.
Eno, do you want to come in?
I mean, again, I just keep thinking I'll say something, and then Ray just says it more amazingly than I could ever do. Again, I agree with Ray. I'd say start earlier. I think that, you know, John's made a really good point about inequalities opening up at an incredibly early age, and I think start earlier before we get to level 2. I think we also, I mean, I can see Alex has put something in the chat around students who are retaking level 2s at college and how we can best support those. And I think there is a kind of side, there is a kind of big side question there that we do need to consider that. I do think that almost like treating it at sort of, you know, that point is kind of symptom rather than cure. But I mean, Ray's points about all of the deep-seated stuff, I think is kind of, you know, it just adds so much more depth to what I was going to say anyway.
I'm going to say that I do think eradicating poverty is outside John Blake's responsibilities in his new role, but I understand kind of the reasons why Ray is saying as she is. Did either Erin or Harlan want to come in on that question?
I'm happy to add. I just added in the chat everything that's been said is fantastic, and I do hope that, you know, raising attainment is really admirable. I hope it happens as best as it can within the kind of possibilities of educational policy. But as has been said, much more needs to happen beyond education for that inequality to be addressed. That being said, I hope that, you know, should attainment change for the better, contextual offers are still in place. You know, a student being on a tutoring program doesn't necessarily make up for what's happening at home or any other barriers that they're facing. So just for any universities listening, of course, continue, you know, the work you do, but let's protect contextual offers.
Definitely, and kind of considering we've heard a lot today about our shared passion actually for evidence-based interventions. We know that tutoring is a very successful intervention kind of for closing the gap, but we also know that contextual admissions play a key role in helping people in that transition from level 2 to level 3. So I've got time for one more question before we have to finish. So I'm going to go to Ellie because she's last in the question box. And it's for Ray, but other people might want to come in. So Ellie's curious on whether you think there is a larger missing link between the map of schools, universities, third sector organisations, and the aspirations of students and their higher education journeys. So are we missing something? Ray.
So are we missing something in the network that we've built between those different types of organisations? I think that Erin actually described really well what I think is the biggest challenge, which is that we talk very different languages. So we talk very different languages in those different sectors. The, you know, third sector, say, talk about very different things when we're doing our fundraising to schools, to universities. Policymakers also talk a different language. When we're building our understanding of what works and how you bring evaluation to bear on the way that you're working, academics working in evaluation also use a different language. I'm aware that we're running out of time, but I just wanted to say a really cheeky, I'm looking at setting up a project at the moment where we bring together policymakers, academics and practitioners to collaborate over a year on evaluating different types of interventions in different institutions and third sector organisations. I haven't worked out the details of how we're going to do it, but I'm really keen to make sure that it's a space where we bring the richness of not just big data, but qualitative and other mixed methodologies, that we really listen to the wisdom of different groups. So if you're interested in being involved in that, and like I said, I don't have the details, but it's one of those things that I'm really driving forward at the moment, because clearly I'm an evaluation geek who likes to chat, then please be in touch and we can carry on the conversation afterwards, because unless we nail these bits, it won't work. We have to be able to talk together.
Thank you, Ray. In order to be prompt, I'm going to finish the questions there. I'll just say kind of a final very few comments, and then we'll finish our kind of excellent event for today. So just making sure, I can't possibly capture everything that has been said and how, but kind of just going back to something in John's speech earlier, and just really clear from our panelists today, but also by our fantastic audience, is we're all here because we believe in the power of education. We're all here because we're frustrated that it's not a fair system, but there's a lot of very smart people who are really passionate about taking an evidence-based approach. Absolutely, we want some clarity in terms of how do you make evaluation work for some of the most marginalized groups, particularly where sample sizes are small. And I'm sorry for those people who ask questions about carers or people in care in the chat that we didn't have time, but how do you make sure that you're able to get the sample sizes to show what works kind of for those groups? I sense a real sense of kind of shared purpose around the life cycle is key, and we've got to start early. I think that Harlem said it best, but it also came across in other people's comments around young people really have to be at the heart of what we're doing. And we like to say that, but sometimes we're still stuck in our own bubbles. So getting that right will enable us to do collaboration in the right way and achieve it. We all know that simplicity is essential, but we like to make things complicated. So we have to hold each other to account in making sure that things are simple. And we know that we really want to continue the conversation. Kind of, as we said at the beginning, Impetus helps convene the Fair Access Coalition. Ray is one of our co-chairs. Please get in touch kind of if you want to continue this and make sure that we're not having the same conversation in 12 months time, but that we have genuinely made progress. So just thank you to everybody who joined us today. And we look forward to future opportunities to kind of building our voice together. And I hope that everybody has a wonderful rest of their evening. So thank you very much. I have impressively brought this to a close at 17:13. I will give myself brownie points. And just thank you to a fantastic panel, and once again to John Blake for sharing his thoughts with us and giving us a roadmap for how we might be able to take opportunities to make fair access and participation a reality. Goodbye, everybody. You are welcome to leave, and we will stop the recording.